So I was at this gathering in Tokyo recently, and it was, well, it was a really interesting mix of people. You had these older, very skilled artisans, and then a bunch of younger professionals.
Okay.
And on the surface, it was just the picture of perfect Japanese harmony. You know, the conversation was flowing, everyone was nodding along. The whole atmosphere was just so incredibly polite.
The famous wa.
Exactly. You look at it and you think, okay, this is it. This is that seamless social cohesion Japan is known for. But then something really subtle happened that, I don't know, it just completely changed how I saw the entire room.
Huh.
This older gentleman, a true master of his craft, he just stopped speaking and he let this long silence hang in the air, what the Japanese call ma.
All right, the interval.
Yeah, and he was so comfortable in it. He was clearly using the pause as like an invitation, a way to bring everyone else into the shared space he was creating.
Mm-hmm.
But the reaction from the younger group, it was almost frantic. I mean, you could feel the anxiety. They didn't see the silence as an invitation at all. They treated it like a threat, a total vacuum. You could literally see the panic in their eyes, and they just immediately rushed to fill it with noise, repeating these, generic agreements and laughing nervously. Anything to keep the vibe from dropping.
Wow.
It wasn't about communal care. It felt much more like self-preservation. And that single moment, it just crystallized this massive invisible shift for me. What looked like harmony was actually just a desperate performance of alignment.
That observation, that tension you could feel in a simple pause, that gets to the absolute core of what we're looking at today. It's that moment where performance completely replaces presence.
It really is. I just couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching a cultural system decaying. That silence should have been rich, full of potential. Instead, it was seen as this frightening, empty space.
And that anxiety is the cornerstone of what we're calling post-relational aesthetics. It's this systemic erosion of traditional Japanese relational beauty, or kankei no bi.
Kankei no bi.
Right. The visible social harmony. The wa, that's still there. It's a powerful cultural mandate. But it's often operating now as just a performance, one designed purely for alignment. The shift you just described, from offering yourself to the space to using the space to protect your ego, that is probably the single most significant cultural transformation happening in Japan right now.
Post-relational aesthetics. It sounds like we're talking about the decay of beauty itself. How does a system that was so rooted in this profound mutual care, the very heart of Japanese social life, become something people just feel they have to perform?
Because the underlying intention changed. The whole engine is different. Traditional relationships, they required a certain vulnerability, a real mutual attunement. This new post-relational system, it prioritizes self-protection. It prioritizes minimizing friction above all else.
So every interaction becomes a transaction.
Exactly. When you put the self first, before participation, every single interaction becomes a transaction designed to validate your own position or at least secure it. And this deep dive is really about tracing the consequences of that massive inversion.
And that's our mission today. We're going to explore how this foundational shift from authentic resonance to these confirmation-biased relationships is really playing out in Japanese society, what it's doing inside their corporations, and even how it shows up on the global stage. Because this isn't just some abstract cultural issue, right? It has very real, very tangible economic and social costs.
It absolutely does. And to really grasp the gravity of this shift, we first have to, deeply understand what was lost, what kankei no bi, or relational beauty, truly was.
Okay, so let's start there. What's the blueprint?
Well, traditionally, the Japanese approach didn't see a relationship as two separate people negotiating their self-interest. It was a form of participation, an offering to the shared space.
You shared space.
Precisely. So the goal wasn't just to, agree with the other person. The goal was to contribute positively, respectfully, to the contextual field itself.
It sounds so much less about the I and so much more about the we, or even just the atmosphere.
Oh, much less about the self.
Yeah.
Relational beauty grew out of mutual attunement. It required this incredible sensitivity, the ability to read silence, and this subtle, constant circulation of care. It was a complex system that actually valued ambiguity.
It valued ambiguity. That seems so counterintuitive to how we think about relationships now.
Well, it understood that genuine harmony often meant embracing differences, integrating them, not just demanding that everyone be the same. Homogeneity wasn't the goal.
That sounds incredibly demanding, though. I mean, how do you sustain something like that? It seems like it would require this constant, almost subconscious level of self-monitoring.
It was sustained by something we could call an ethics as sensibility, and this is a really crucial point.
Ethics as sensibility. What does that mean exactly?
It wasn't based on explicit rational rules, a universal moral code like you often see in Western ethics. Instead, your moral and social worth was basically determined by your aesthetic performance.
Their performance.
Yeah, your contextual awareness, your timing, your rhythm, your ability to navigate all these unspoken social dynamics. If you behaved appropriately for the space, you were seen as ethical. If you were clumsy or disruptive, you weren't.
So your ethics are judged by your refinement. That actually makes a lot of sense, given the cultural emphasis on form in Japan. But this whole system, it seems to hinge on that one concept you mentioned earlier, the one that gives it all room to happen, ma.
Yes.
In that opening story, the pause, the ma, that was the tipping point. So let's really unpack that. What is the true philosophical depth of ma?
Right. So ma, it's written with the character u, and it's often just translated as interval or space. But that's so simplistic. It's much, much more than a gap. It refers to the pause between elements. It could be the distance between two rocks in a garden, or the silence between notes in a piece of music. But crucially, ma is the non-form that actually defines the form. It's the breath. It's the interval that gives the whole structure meaning.
And what I found so surprising is that the philosophical elevation of this idea, I mean, taking it from just a practical term to this huge aesthetic framework, that's actually a pretty modern thing.
It is, yes. The generalization of ma as a full-blown philosophical concept, that happened mostly in the 20th century, around 1929 to be more specific.
For what then?
Well, it was largely a response to the rapid importation of Western thought. Japanese thinkers were searching for a term, an idea, that could define a uniquely Japanese understanding of space and being. They needed a cultural alternative to Western individualism and its, very concrete definitions.
So it was a defense mechanism, in a way to philosophically articulate the inherent relational nature of their own society against this incoming tide of individualism.
That's a great way to put it, precisely. Ma was then defined as a sphere of life or an intersubjective space. Philosophically, it signifies this unidirectional tension.
It's unidirectional tension.
The idea is that the individual being projects itself outwards to achieve self-awareness, but that awareness only happens through resonance with the world around it. So ma isn't empty space. It's a dynamic, active space. It's the moment of potential where self-knowledge is revealed through connection.
Wow. Okay, so that's the profound difference right there. The traditional sensibility saw that pause as a moment of active contribution, a moment of potential.
Yes.
But the modern self-protective ego sees it as a terrifying lack of confirmation, a vacuum that has to be filled instantly.
That is the core realization. And this active understanding of ma, it underlies every single supporting aesthetic principle of kankei no bi. They're all, in a way, just techniques for engaging with that interval productively.
Okay, so let's walk through some of those. How do they manifest? Maybe starting with the beauty of emptiness, yohaku no bi.
Yohaku no bi, yes. The beauty of white space. This is one that's often misunderstood in the West as just, minimalism.
Right, less is more.
But it's not about that. The emptiness isn't seen as a lack of content. It's recognized as a presence. It's an active invitation for your imagination, for reflection.
The designer Kenya Hura's work is so instructive here, isn't it? He argues that white isn't just a background in his designs, it's a voice.
It's a starting point. It's a blank slate of potential that carries this quiet expectation. By deliberately leaving that space, you, the viewer, are forced to engage with the implied content. It's beauty that's achieved through the discipline of leaving room for the other person to complete the picture. It requires that mutual attunement between the art and the audience.
Which means the artist has to trust the viewer. That's fascinating. It's interesting how yohaku no bi is all about internal subtraction, but the next concept, shakai, seems to be about external addition.
Shakai, or borrowed scenery. Yes, it's this wonderful holistic philosophy of welcoming the world that's beyond your control.
So like framing a view.
Exactly. It's the art of framing external reality. A distant mountain, a patch of sky, a few trees through a window, or some garden architecture. You're effectively softening the boundary between your inside space and the outside world.
It creates such a sense of stillness, doesn't it? Because the environment, which is totally uncontrollable, is intentionally made a part of the aesthetic design. You're allowing the world to contribute to your own experience.
It's a beautiful demonstration of humility, of relational awareness.
Yeah.
You're acknowledging that beauty doesn't always have to be invented or controlled by you. Sometimes you just need to frame it and give it the space to enter.
Okay, so we've moved from space to this idea of attitude. Let's talk about iki. The attitude that makes a person elegant within that carefully crafted space.
Right, iki. Effortless elegance. This is the kind of refined duty that whispers. It never shouts. It's
Yeah.
not about wealth or some flashy display. It's rooted in a quiet confidence and a very sophisticated taste.
This came from the Edo period city dwellers, right?
Yes, from their stylishness. It's all based on spirit and subtlety. Choosing, say, one single color that perfectly reflects the current season, or wearing honest, simple materials. It's the ultimate expression of self-assurance, because it doesn't need any outside validation.
The right people will get it.
Exactly. Those with a discerning eye will recognize its charm, but it never tries to dominate the best. It's understated. It relies on a deep internal refinement.
And next on the list is shitsurai.
Shitsurai. Preparing space with meaning. This is the practice of intentional arrangement. The placement of flowers, a piece of calligraphy, seasonal objects. It's described as a quiet gesture of care and respect for others.
It's like ritualized hospitality.
It is. And it reflects this deep sensitivity to time, to the season, to the specific occasion. By meticulously preparing the space, you're reflecting your awareness, your devotion. You're offering this nonverbal respect to the person who's about to enter. It's a perfect example of that ethics as sensibility we talked about. Your care is expressed aesthetically.
So if shitsurai is the preparation for the moment, the final principle, yoin, it's the memory of it.
That's a perfect way to put it, yoin. Lingering emotion or resonance. It's that emotional impression that quietly remains after a moment has passed. It really values the unfinished, the unspoken, the implied. It's that quiet humming feeling you have after a really meaningful encounter.
So it actively resists the need for everything to be spelled out, to have a definitive closure. It trusts that the resonance that was created in the ma, in that interval, will just continue to vibrate in your memory.
Exactly. All of these principles, they rely on the active nature of that interval, the ma, to define the richness of kankei no bi.
But then it all starts to break down.
Yes. The problem really began when those cultural values inverted. And this was, as we mentioned, catalyzed by the post-war importation of Western individualism. But it led not to this liberated free self, but to a profoundly isolated self-protective ego.
And that's the absolute core tragedy, isn't it? The self, when it's decoupled from that traditional context of the bed, it just felt exposed. And relationships suddenly became linear, transactional. They became focused on self-projection rather than that mutual reflection.
The old system, the one that could integrate difference through this complex attunement, it just collapsed. Modern relationships now seek harmony through similarity and, very importantly, explicit agreement. The social space isn't a canvas for complexity anymore. It's a confirmation mirror.
So people are just seeking interactions that validate what they already believe. They're turning relationships into a form of continuous confirmation bias. Disagreement isn't a challenge anymore. It's a threat.
A deep threat to the self. And what's fascinating is that this shift is actually measurable. We can see the clear empirical evidence of rising individualism in things like family structure.
Right, like the divorce rate.
Exactly. Look at the divorce rate. It quadrupled. It went from about 8.5 per 100 couples in 1947 to 35.6 in 2015. That reflects a major cultural permission slip being written for individual independence.
And you see it in household size, too. That profound decrease from an average of 5 people in 1953 to just 2.5 in 2015. That shows the real material impact of urbanization, of economic wealth allowing for people to separate, to atomize. This restructuring just fundamentally changes the demands placed on relationships.
Yeah, and the drive for individual distinction is also strikingly clear in naming practices. We see this trend of seeking uniqueness in names for children, even for pets. And it's been increasing since at least the 1980s.
I found this part fascinating. Parents are using traditional Chinese characters, the kanji, but then creating these uncommon pronunciations for them. It's like a way of signaling a desire for individuality while still using familiar cultural components. It's a way of saying, I am unique, but I'm still nominally part of the group.
It's individualism operating within a residual collectivist framework. The perfect little linguistic example of the whole paradox, and it's corroborated by studies showing this long-term increase in the use of individualistic words like uniqueness and individual in national newspapers over the last 140 years. Language itself is tracking the increasing focus on the self.
So we have all this overwhelming evidence of individualism on the rise, but the painful part of the paradox is that the demand for collectivism, the demand for harmony, that hasn't gone away.
No, not at all. The internal conflict is acute. Values like respecting your parents or valuing your friends, those remain stable. The result is this highly pressurized, really ambiguous context. The demand for harmony persists, but the authentic relational tools, the kankei no bai, have been replaced by these mechanisms of self-preservation.
And the human cost of this contradiction, it's just perfectly encapsulated in what you call the tea master's paradox. The story of Hiro.
Yes, Hiro, the tea ceremony master. He performs the highest form of relational beauty, of connection through silence, kankei no pi. He embodies this deep cultural tradition, mostly for international consumption, selling it as a form of Japanese soft power.
And the profound irony is that the very aesthetic he exports is the one thing he struggles to find in his own modern personal life.
Exactly. His world, once he steps outside that tea room, is completely atomized. He described modern dating as purely transactional, a search for someone who just mirrors his own identity and provides affirmation.
Instead of that mutual asymmetrical devotion that he practices in the ceremony.
Precisely. He's caught between the culture he preserves and sells and the atomized self he actually lives. It's such a powerful illustration of the problem. The shell of harmony remains, but the living ethic inside has been starved to death.
And this collapse of relational ethics versus the persistence of this structural collectivism, it plays out with massive stakes inside Japanese corporations. The traditional system was built on stability, right? Lifetime employment, collectivism rooted in wa.
These structures were engineered to do one thing really well: minimize friction and maximize cohesion. The traditional consensus mechanisms, while they were very inclusive, were also incredibly slow. They always prioritized stability over agility.
Let's get into those mechanisms, starting with nimowashi.
Nimowashi. It literally means root binding. It refers to the preparatory work you do before transplanting a tree to make sure it survives.
Okay, so a business metaphor.
A very apt one. In business, it's the practice of having informal pre-meetings. You use them to resolve any objections privately, behind the scenes, before you ever have a formal gathering.
Which ensures that by the time the formal meeting happens, everyone has already signed off. It prevents public dissent, prevents any loss of face or friction. It's basically enforcing harmony through pre-approval.
That's it, exactly. And the second mechanism is the ringishe, the formal circulation of proposals. A physical document is literally passed around horizontally and vertically, and it requires the stamps, the hanko, for managers at multiple levels.
So the purpose isn't speed, obviously. It's about collective responsibility. By needing seals from dozens of people, everyone becomes equally invested and, importantly, equally culpable in the decision. It ensures long-term commitment and stability.
But here's the catch. These systems, they rely entirely on a baseline ethic of mutual care. When that kankei no bai erodes and the self-protective ego takes over, these systems, well, they metastasize into what we can call the groupthink threat. The avoidance of conflict, the wa, leads directly to confirmation bias.
So any dissenting or innovative ideas get suppressed because they're seen as threats to this fragile consensus rather than as valuable contributions.
And the material result of that is conservative, risk-averse, and just agonizingly slow decision-making, which, as you can imagine, severely handicaps Japanese firms against their global competitors, especially in fast-paced fields like technology and finance.
You see the human tragedy of this in the story of Kenji, a mid-level manager at a huge electronics company who came face-to-face with the silent boardroom.
Right. Kenji had developed this potentially transformative new sensor technology. It was a desperately needed innovation for his company, which was really struggling with hardware sales.
Yeah.
He went in to pitch it, expecting, a healthy debate, some back and forth.
But the atmosphere just lacked any psychological safety.
None. He realized almost immediately that the executives weren't looking for resonance. They weren't interested in a new idea. They were just scanning for confirmation of the status quo. His radical proposal introduced friction, and you could feel the air in the room just freeze.
That's silence again.
That's silence again. The moment he deviated from the assumed consensus, he encountered that paralyzing silence. But this wasn't the deep maw of invitation. This was the self-protective stare of rejection.
And Kenji, sensing that demand for homogeneity, he just performed his own act of self-preservation.
He did. He chose conformity. He started watering down his own pitch in real time, turning it into these incremental, non-disruptive changes.
The innovation just died right there in the room. It died because the corporate structure, so rigidly committed to avoiding conflict, had weaponized silence against anything that might cause disagreement.
There's a perfect summary of this corporate atmosphere. It results in isolation without freedom and silence without understanding.
Yeah.
And the consequences, they're not abstract. They lead directly to massive corporate failures.
We only have to look at some of the high-profile examples. Let's start with the Toshiba scandal.
A classic case. A culture that prioritized consensus and penalized dissent allowed profit inflation. We're talking over $1 billion, $1.2 billion, to go on unchecked for years. The lack of diversity, the imperative for WA, it meant that no one felt safe enough to challenge the executive pressure or report the misconduct. The structure itself actively prevented any ethical scrutiny.
And then there's the Mitsubishi Electric scandal, which shows the long-term toxicity.
Decades of it. A homogeneous, fear-driven culture allowed quality control data to be falsified for decades across multiple factories because employees were just too afraid to introduce the friction of dissent. The rigid demand for harmony meant that honesty was penalized. It allowed this institutionalized deception to continue for years, and it eventually just devastated the corporate value when the truth finally came out. These cases prove that when the relational ethic dissolves, rigid structures that were designed for stability become catastrophic liabilities.
And what's so fascinating is how this internal crisis of conformity runs completely parallel to Japan's outward-facing strategy, Cool Japan. This big top-down government initiative leveraging soft power to boost exports and tourism, selling Japanese culture to the world.
Yes, Cool Japan. It tries to market everything from anime and traditional arts to cuisine and high-tech gadgets as this singular, unique offering on the global stage. It's a massive nation branding exercise.
But the whole initiative suffers from this profound, almost debilitating lack of definition. It's basically devolved into a vague catchphrase.
It really has. If you look at the official deliberations, the officials and stakeholders themselves can't even agree on what Cool Japan is. It just gets constantly diluted by grafting on new, disparate attributes. One day it's regional crafts, the next it's fashion. It's treated like this giant list of marketable artifacts with no clear, unifying narrative behind it.
And this vagueness has led to a lot of public distrust, hasn't it? Especially around the budget and the execution.
Absolutely. The entertainer Gact, for instance, he publicly questioned the massive budget and the total lack of verifiable results. He suggested the money was just floating in the air and probably flowing to all these disconnected entities. It really highlights a substantial governance failure and a real disconnect from the actual domestic cultural creators.
So because the official definition is so vague, the whole initiative just defaults to relying on these old historical identity narratives, what the sources call the resilience of the uniqueness myth.
And this narrative, you can trace it back over a century. It constructs Japan's global identity through what's called dual otherness.
Dual otherness.
It positions Japan as simultaneously non-Western and un-Asian. It's this visual and cultural paradox.
And that framing creates that really compelling image, doesn't it? A society that blends extreme tradition with hypermodernity. It offers this unique blend of experiences that no other nation can supposedly match.
We saw this exact strategy used in their Olympic bids, presenting Japan as a rare montage of the old within the new. And today, that same myth is used to facilitate what we could call packaging the abstract. The goal is to commodify these intangible values, like Japanese spirituality, diligence, and hospitality.
So essentially, they're relying on the global public's perception of Japan as this unique cultural entity that can provide an unparalleled, high-quality consumer experience.
That's it. They're selling the aesthetic shell of kankei by the perfect attention, the perfect care to the world, which just reinforces the whole paradox, exporting a spiritual connection that internally is struggling to survive.
So where do they go from here? The path forward for these institutions must be about finding a balance.
It has to be. A balance between their core strengths, stability, inclusiveness, and the modern necessity for agility and innovation. It means preserving the good parts of the collectivist framework while actively designing ways to mitigate groupthink and reintroduce psychological safety.
So if the problem is this self-protective ego that's demanding instant confirmation, then the solution has to lie in consciously designing tools and environments that can reintroduce safety and resonance, basically reclaiming the ma.
Which brings us to the really practical application of ma in the digital age. And it comes through the story of Emmy, the UX designer, who was trying to create a digital ma for a messaging platform.
This is a great story. So Emmy recognized that our existing digital tools, they just enforce this linearity, they fuel that confirmation anxiety. Indicators like read, they just accelerate the pressure for soakers for an instant reply. It turns connection into a transactional expectation.
Right. She observed that the platform offered no grace period. There was no acceptable pause for absorption. So her solution, which she called the breath, was this really counterintuitive approach. She introduced a subtle, nonlinear thinking state animation instead of that harsh binary of read.
She digitized the interval, the ma.
She did. It signals presence and absorption without demanding instant action. It tells the sender, I'm here, I'm processing this, but you are not obligated to transact with me right now.
It reintroduces ambiguity and space into communication. It shifts the interaction back towards a sensibility-based ethic, where the pause is a form of care, not a form of rejection. The digital ma provides that necessary breathing room for human resonance.
And Amy's story, I think it holds a global key. Our current tools are all designed for maximizing efficiency and explicit data exchange. But as the Japanese experience shows us so clearly, when you optimize solely for speed, you often kill empathy.
The future of healthy collaboration isn't just about faster connection, then.
No, it's about consciously designing the space between the connections, the ma. It's about allowing for complex thought, for empathy, for genuine human resonance to actually occur.
And if we can design for ma in a messaging platform, we can certainly design for it in a corporate boardroom by creating the psychological safety needed for radical ideas to be seen as contributions, not threats to the collective ego.
And, this whole crisis, it's prompting a deeper philosophical evolution within the culture itself. You can see it in the philosopher Kitano Takeshi's perspective on the word manuk.
Right, manuk.
Yeah.
Which traditionally means outside of ma. It means a fool, someone who is just oblivious to context and rhythm.
Yes, a very negative term.
Yeah.
But Takeshi suggests that the concept could be redefined as a positive force, a force for freedom and creativity. His argument is that if the collective ma has become this coercive social barrier that crushes individuality,
then embracing the manuk is a deliberate act of breaking free.
it's a deliberate act of breaking that coercive social structure. It's about creating space for an individuality that doesn't rely on confirmation bias and allowing the Japanese identity to evolve authentically.
So we started this whole deep dive by observing the panic of silence. We traced these exquisite aesthetics that once defined authentic relational connection in Japan, and we watched them collapse under the weight of the self-protective ego. We saw how this conformity stifles innovation and leads to tragedies like the silent boardroom.
And we've established this painful paradox. Japan is exporting the aesthetic of genuine attunement globally through things like Cool Japan. It's performing harmony for consumption while simultaneously struggling internally to cultivate that very connection. The crucial challenge for modern society really is clear. We cannot sustain resilient relationships, or corporate health, or even a coherent national identity by relying solely on superficial agreement and confirmation bias. The work ahead is finding a way to cultivate authentic relational qualities, that original kankei no bai, without falling back on rigid, coercive social barriers. It's about making heritage a living, evolving ethic, and not just a marketable aesthetic.